All right, so it looks like we're live on the air. Welcome, everyone. This is our first discussion with the YogaMOOC instructors, and very pleased to be able to spend some time here with Dr. Catherine Spann and Stacey Dawkins. Dave won't be joining us tonight, but you'll see him in future sessions. One of the things that we want to do today is just respond to some of the questions that have been posted in the forum, and there have been fantastic questions directed to the instructors. So we want to dive into some of those questions. We're not going to be able to get to all of them just because of the scope that we're asked. But before we get started, I think it might be a good idea just to hear a little bit of background and a bit of how you got here from your two main instructors that you've seen on most of the videos. So Stacey, why don't we start with you? Yoga is your area of expertise, and tell us a bit, how did you end up here and what brought you to this point in your career?
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And I guess I'll start back. I've been teaching yoga for a little over 20 years now, and we own 3 yoga studios in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex called the Yoga Project, and that's where I met George and Catherine both. And we also run a teacher training school called Free Life People School of Yoga. And gosh, it must have been a year and a half ago, Catherine, I believe. Yeah, Catherine came and she said, hey, we're working on this project. George and I are working on this project. We're going to create a YogaMOOC. I had no idea what the word MOOC was, and I think I have it now, but and I've been a little confused about that word for a while. But yeah, so we just dove in about a little over a year ago, and here we are today.
And what about yourself? As you've got the 3 studios, you've taught, trained hundreds, if not more, teachers. You do these teacher trainings, different parts of the world. I know you just had one, I believe, was in Thailand. You've got one coming up in Bali in January. I know you've done them in Costa Rica in the past. Maybe tell us a little bit about your role as the Yoga Project owners.
Oh, as the Yoga Project owners. Not the,
yes.
Not the school. Yeah.
Sorry, bring them both together, but I'm trying to look at the yoga experience, what you've done with yoga, because you've had a big impact on many people's lives with the studios locally where I first met you and Dave, and also through the school.
Yeah, so we first began the Yoga Project in 2005. So I had been teaching at different places up to that point, and I really wasn't after owning a business at all. I had no business sense at all, but I really just wanted my own space to be able to teach a yoga class the way I wanted to teach a yoga class. And so that was how the Yoga Project began. And gosh, shortly after that, we needed teachers. And so that's how I sort of wrangled Dave into teaching yoga. He has a good story. Maybe he'll share about that sometime. But yeah, so he started teaching, and then as we grew into 3 locations pretty quickly, and we just had the need for teachers, and we really wanted to train teachers to teach with just the philosophy that we were carrying and the things that we were embracing with what we were teaching. And so we started training teachers not too long after we opened the studio, and I've been with a couple of different yoga teacher training schools, actually. And so we actually train teachers all over. And we have, like George said, just different international programs. And so we train a lot of the teachers that work for us, but we also train a lot of other studios, teachers for studios across the nation as well.
Great, thanks, Stacey. I think one of the challenges, and Catherine picked up on this, that we've noticed is we sort of dove into the course with the videos. We never really had a chance to hear from, who is Stacey and who is Catherine, the people that you spend most of your time with in this course. So, Catherine, I'll turn it over to you. How did you get to where you are now?
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. So I am currently a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Colorado at Boulder. I just started this position a couple months ago. So prior to that, I was at the University of Texas at Arlington, and I worked with you, George. It's where I became interested in more in education and open education. And so my background is in psychological science. I have a PhD in experimental psychology. And most of my graduate work actually was in developmental psychology. So I was doing a bunch of research on how children learn to self-regulate and how that develops in the early years of life, even as young as 2 years old. I would bring children in the lab and study how they can have self-control and things like that. And then in later childhood, I became interested in interventions to foster self-control. So I became really interested in mindfulness and meditation as a tool to help individuals self-regulate. So that was sort of my entry point. And then over time, naturally, I started studying yoga and from a scientific lens, and then also personally going to the Yoga Project in Texas. And that was really where both of those sort of worlds collided. Was my personal yoga practice and mindfulness practice with my research. And so now I get to sort of live that every day, and I'm really grateful for that. So like I said, currently I am in Colorado, and I'm continuing doing research on meditation and expanding that more into topics like mind wandering and emotion regulation and that sort of thing.
Great. Well, thanks, both of you. One of the things I guess I'd like to hear a little bit more about is we're about 3 weeks into the course now. And so being at this point in the course, it's time to maybe look a little bit at what are you learning? What are some of your impressions now, seeing an awful lot of discussion posts and seeing a huge amount of interactions from students and a lot of questions that it's just almost impossible to stay on top of at times. But if you were to say, okay, I'm this far into the course, here's what I've learned and here's what I'm experiencing in the course, what would you emphasize? Let's start with you, Stacy.
Well, one of the things that I think that has had a big impression upon me is just a reminder of how powerful shared experience is. Just getting on and reading everyone's responses about, oh, I'm learning how to awaken to my habits. I'm incorporating the 5-breath pause, and it's done this for me and that for me. And it's so inspiring to read that. Even though, Catherine and I wrote the exercises, it's like seeing it through a whole different lens, seeing it through a whole different perspective, hearing your thoughts on it. And it's so inspiring just to see everyone's experience. And it makes me want to, be more on top of those exercises myself as I see you guys involved in them. So that's one of the biggest things for me. The other thing that's I really am curious about and learning more about is just how vast the group of people are doing the yoga, and like what it's like to teach yoga to such a huge group of people, and then online. And so these factors that are so interesting to work with, and something that's so physical and that works so well in person. And so just, kind of watching that all unfold, and I feel like I have so much to learn in that area. But yeah, that's what I'm seeing the most.
Yeah, it's terrific points. And I mean, it really is different experience teaching in an environment that's digital. And that's been the case. So for myself, I'm with the Link Research Lab at University of Texas. And I've spent a lot of my time teaching in online environments, not yoga, but I've taught doctoral students, master students in online environments. And it's something it's a very powerful way to connect with people, but it's important to also recognize the limitations of the space. Mm-hmm. But really, one of the amazing things I've seen is just the diversity and the global nature. When you've got, nearly 200 countries represented from individuals around the world, like what a fantastic experience just to see how different people interact and the knowledge they bring. And it's this real sense that we are networked globally, which means we all hold parts of the answers. I'm always fascinated to see somebody ask a question and someone comes by and answers it, and someone gives a slightly different perspective and someone gives a different perspective. Like what a terrific way to learn. Mm-hmm. Let's throw it over to you, Catherine, in terms of what are some of your observations or experiences from the early stage of the course so far? What sort of struck you?
So for me, it's been such a personal practice to put these things that I study and research into practice. So as we go forward in the course, you'll hear more about topics like self-compassion and things like that. And I feel like going into this, I wanted to be in the seat of a learner. I knew that I wasn't going to please everyone with the topics and the videos, but I'm not sure if I was fully prepared by all the feedback. And I think putting these things that I know are beneficial, like self-compassion, just patience, kindness, recognize acceptance and awareness, just sort of recognizing that every single person has a unique point of view and there's always something that I can learn. So for example, the first week there was, responses with our research survey. And it was something that I never even thought that would be an issue. And to see that people had concerns about it and that those were valid concerns, to recognize that I have this automatic reaction of defensiveness or something like that, but just to practice mindfulness and be aware of it and accept it as it is, and then practice compassion towards myself and to others. That's going into the forums. It's been like a really neat practice to put into place. So it's been quite humbling, and I'm just realizing that I really enjoy being a learner, and I really enjoy hearing what others have to say about it, and view it as a way to make the course better, so we can make it even more useful to learners in the future.
Yeah, that's a terrific point. And I think you touch on something that's really important to be aware of or to recognize, which is especially for you and Stacy, you've put yourself out there in a way that is actually quite vulnerable making. Because when you put a video together that says, this is what research says about yoga, or when Stacy puts a video together on a yoga practice session, there are different ways of doing everything. There's different ways of looking at the research. There's different ways of doing different kinds of practice. And we all speak from our own perspectives, which is, this is what I would like to see. This is what I needed here. And so it is a vulnerable making process. And I think the point that you just raised, Catherine, is really quite central to it, which is we need to practice some degree of compassion, obviously, for the two of you who've put yourself out in a lot of different ways, but also compassion for others that I've read in the forum, individuals who are picking up yoga practice slowly after an injury, people who are revisiting a practice that they've let go, people who are dealing with addictions and picking it up, people who are 80 years old and who are starting it, people who've never done yoga in their life and are picking it up when they're a teenager, and the list goes on. It's important to recognize that these experiences are global in nature and universal. And something I've always thought personally is that when we share our learning transparently, we're essentially teaching other people. And that's one of the fascinating aspects that has definitely come out of the forums. Let's turn to some of the specific questions now. And I should mention, for those of you that are joining the session here, I'm following a few feedback points here. And Lucy just said, yes, Catherine, the meditation and compassion are really an eye-opener for me. And I think it's just that sense of when you make a bit of yourself known to others, people are it resonates with them. So I think that's terrific to see. So I'll try and field a few questions that are coming in the forum, but I also want to emphasize when it comes to medical issues, there's doctors, there's roles that you need to attend to. So there's a lot of questions around specific medical dynamics, and we always emphasize the doctor aspect. We will pick up some questions on addiction later on. We'll comment on it, but these are the kinds of things that need to be sought with healthcare, mental health experts. So please be aware of the limitations of the conversations that we're having here. So let's start and just dive right into just some of the tremendous questions that we have received. So one of the first questions that I thought was interesting, which is personal habits, and I'm going to ask each of you this question, which is, what are your daily mindfulness, meditation, and yoga practice habits outside of when you instruct? Lead us through a day and how you live it mindfully. Stacy, let's begin with you. That's been our routine.
Yeah, so it's taken me quite a while to get to the point that I am now. I would say for about the past 2 years, I've gotten to where I pretty much follow the RPM, and I can't remember who I learned that from, RPM, but it rise, P, meditate. But basically, that's what my practice is. Every single morning, I get up and right away, first thing in the morning, I sit for about 20 minutes. And as far as my actual physical yoga practice, it really varies because I teach so much throughout the week. And now when I teach, I'm not actually doing my own practice. I'm walking around and helping students for the most part. So it really varies, but I aim to get 4 to 5 practices in a week. And typically 3 of those are at the studio and the other 2 are home practices. Yeah, so that's really my practice each week. And as far as mindfulness outside of that, wow, that's a big question, George. But it's really everything, the exercises that Catherine and I developed and that we're sharing with you this program, that's really everything that we are aiming to practice. Am I perfect at it? Nowhere near. That's why it's so amazing to learn, again, as Catherine said, alongside you guys. But yeah, that's my regular meditation and mat practice, yoga mat practice.
Great, thanks. So Catherine, over to you. How do you live your day in life mindfully?
First of all, I thought that you said 45 and my jaw dropped, but you said 4 to 5. Like, that's not possible, Stacy.
Not believable at all.
My personal practice, I would say it's almost the opposite of Stacy's. I would love to say that I get up and meditate. I do go through spurts, certainly, where if I've gone on a retreat or something like that, I'll make it a regular practice. As everyone who has practiced meditation knows, it is a struggle to develop that routine and stick with it. I would say I really try my best to develop habits throughout the day. And formal practice, I would just say that's attending to my breath. So like very brief mindfulness practices throughout the day where I'll just put in a minute of breath. I do that even multiple times an hour. My main mindfulness practice is being outside in nature with my dog. That is a huge practice for me. I wouldn't call that meditation, although I've certainly heard people say, oh, I meditate when I'm running and that sort of thing. And maybe that's something we can discuss. But for me, that's really just being fully present, being fully there, being in nature, observing animals and trees. I have to have that every day to feel right. So if I usually do those once or twice a day. So, and then I have my yoga practice usually about twice a week. I'll go to a studio or I'll do mini practices at home.
Great, and I love the variance. I think that's something I've found fascinating in wellness and well-being literature as well, which is that there is no one way to do these things. In fact, the two of you shared very distinct approaches, both of which have overlap, of course, and I'm sure that you both practice them in different ways at different times. But this idea that you can take pauses and focusing breaths throughout the day, as well as that get up in the morning and meditate right away, that type of approach or strategy. So it gets down to recognizing that the practices can be adjusted or changed to our own lifestyle, our own habits. Somebody in the YouTube forum just posted, like, how do you practice mindfulness in the middle of a big noisy city, which is going to be a different set of practices than if you live out in Kansas somewhere by a cornfield, or, oh, I don't know, in Boulder enjoying fresh snow. And I think those are the kinds of things to be aware of, is that there are different approaches, different ways that we can engage in these practices. So from a mindfulness end, the way that you teach or the way you're involved with, I want to turn specifically to the practice aspect. And for those of you that are listening now, I'm going to jump back and forth between some specific yoga practice questions and some research questions, so that we see them not as two separate things, but recognizing that they're both quite intertwined. Now, there's a challenge here that both of you alluded to a little bit in your introductions here, or sharing your own practice, and that's this: life is busy. There's a lot going on. We all have stuff in our lives. We have family, friends. We're trying to get some leisure time. And how do you develop yoga and mindfulness or meditation practices without them becoming something stressful or something that you feel obligated that you need to do? So as this person's question boils down, how can I make time to do yoga and also to make it fun? How would you respond to that? Because that's a real challenge in a crazy, hectic world. Why don't we start with you this time, Catherine?
Is it the question about yoga specifically?
It asks specifically yoga, but I think we can, one of the approaches is, or the questions focus on yoga and meditation. So, yeah.
So I would say if you're not really enjoying something, if it's actually, putting you in a negative mood, I'm not sure if I would advise, practicing that regularly. That might be controversial. There is definitely, my dog is in the picture. That's Georgia, everyone. She, I would just say that there's a sort of a steep, I wouldn't call it a learning curve, but just an adjustment period where it could be difficult to begin a new meditation practice. So, and I wrote a blog post about this, but the idea isn't really to go and do it and like feel great and happy and joyous. You may enter a meditation practice and be a bit agitated, or it may conjure up some difficult emotions or difficult feelings. And I will say that that's completely normal. So maybe it's about your intention. So if you're going into the practice thinking, oh, this is just supposed to make me feel good, then you'll probably always be disappointed. It's more about taking the time to just explore your own mind and explore your own body, to get in touch with yourself for a short period of time. So I'll say, basically, if you're doing it for an extended period of time and you just hate it and yoga isn't working for you, then you shouldn't feel forced to do something just because it works for other people. I would say find a habit, a wellness practice that works for you, and realize that it can be difficult, and stick with it for the amount of time that you think is suitable. And if it's working, then keep going and make adjustments. So where it's your own personal practice, no one's telling you exactly what to do for exactly a certain amount of time. It's your own practice. So make adjustments as necessary. And I will say that there are other types of meditation. What we've done in the course is mostly mindfulness. There's one compassion practice. So there are many, many types of meditation that you could explore that may work for you more so than just a mindfulness practice.
Great, thanks. I think that's a really important point, is the idea of different practices in different contexts. And also the point that you raised a little bit earlier is sometimes a breath and 30 seconds of breathing while you're in traffic. Maybe that's at that stage in time of your life, that's all that you can squeeze in. And even that 30 seconds of practice is still going to be better than not doing anything at all. One of the writers that I've come to appreciate is Thich Nhat Hanh, and he emphasizes the idea of trying to find, say, a day where all you do is you wake up and you live your life exactly like you live it every other day, but to continually try and emphasize, where am I? What am I doing now? What am I experiencing now? So that you're trying to live life, but not have the practice become a bear to deal with. What's been your experience, Stacey?
Well, I agree with everything that both you just said, and I love that. Where am I? What am I doing now? I love that practice from moment to moment during the day. And I think, I saw this question on the forum, and for myself, it really took a why. I had to know for myself, well, why do I want to practice this? Like, and if I didn't have it and this is just my personal experience, but I know I can remember distinctly. Probably 10 years ago, I have 3 children that are all getting a little older. My oldest is 21 now, but when they were younger, I remember hearing a little bit about mindfulness. I was already doing yoga, but I hadn't truly incorporated mindfulness into yoga and really found that blend between the two as I do now. But I remember just kind of having a moment where I realized I was so incredibly distracted. I was so incredibly distracted, and I was missing out on so much of my life because of it. And that just became really apparent to me. And I thought, here I have these 3 beautiful children that are, changing day by day, and I'm allowing myself to be so distracted and so anxious and so stressed, and allowing maybe a bit harsh. There's a lot around that, but I had to have a why. And so I did some reflection and some contemplation and journaling around why I wanted this for myself. And once I got clear on the why, and through my journaling, and today I still journal on that question, why. But that is really what helps me make time. If I don't make it a priority, well, I remind myself of what the why, and the why can change. It's ebbing and flowing, as my life changes. But I think that's really key. I don't know, Catherine, if you have that similar experience, or George, but that why is so important to me. And then beyond the why, the really practical stuff of making it work. And I totally agree with Catherine. Like, yoga is just one way. There are so many different ways to practice mindful awareness, and find something that you enjoy, find something that you love. And sometimes it's making it special. Sometimes it's, getting yourself a little special corner in your home, or a mat with a candle, or something that you enjoy, or doing it with other people is another idea too. Having a friend do it with you, maybe seeking out something like a community center, or somewhere where you can be with other people to do it. Sometimes that's really helpful, but it's also unique in what helps us maintain a practice and what helps us make it a priority. But I would definitely come back to that, really asking the question of, why do you want to do it?
I think that's so true. I think that applies to so many other areas of our lives, not just a personal meditation or yoga practice. Why are you doing certain things? Why are you eating a certain way? Are you doing things just because other people are doing it, just because it's trendy, just because you think it might be good? Do you understand it? And do you understand how it's impacting you? So yeah, I would just completely agree and say that's a great point. That really encourage people to say, why are you doing it?
Mm-hmm. And I love the strategy as well that Stacey brought in around the journaling and the reflection time. I mean, I've certainly found journaling has been a sort of a lifelong companion that I'll drop for years and then pick it up again when something needs to be processed. And that's one of the things we tried to build in the course with the reflective journal activities, is just to build this habit of maybe reflecting on what's happened. I think one of the challenges in our digital world is the pace is so hectic. Where do we have the pause button to process what we're experiencing? Mm-hmm. Stacey, let me throw something to you that's come out a number of times in the forums, and this is something I know that you've thought about a lot and is reflective in how you teach your yoga teachers as well. But that's so one person asks a question, 74 years old, has difficulty maintaining the poses for as long as the teachers in the class often ask them to hold a pose for. And we've had a lot of individuals that are, say, a little bit older, and the experience is going to be different when you're 18 years old versus when you're 74 years old. But the question is it okay to stay in a pose for 30 seconds to 1 minute, or is it okay to drop it off when you can't hold it as long as an instructor wants you to hold it? How would you ask them to handle that from someone who deals with that, say, due to age?
Absolutely. And I will say a minute is a long time. Like a minute to hold a pose is quite long. But, you know, that we see so many people come through our studios. And I always say this, but like the people who I see that have the most quote unquote success, whatever you want to call it, are the ones that can come in and be okay with meeting themselves exactly where they're at. And so just like that, like if you can hold the pose for 20 seconds and the class is still holding it 20 seconds longer, then you do your 20 seconds, be in your body, feel it, be in your breath. And that's all you need. You don't need to do it, longer than that. Now, there is that element of needing a little bit of your edge. If it is, if you are wanting to gain stamina and get a little bit stronger, holding it to where you get to that space to where it becomes a little bit of a challenge is always good for that edge of growth. But I say, goodness, like just make it your own. And that goes with, whether it's the length of the pose or it's how low you're going in a lunge or how high you're taking your hand or how wide you're putting your feet. All of those things are variable because as human beings, we are very variable. And so, really, it's really vital to make it fit to you. And you're not missing any of the benefit for not taking, your front thigh parallel to the ground in Warrior One. You're not getting less of a practice than the person next to you who's doing a deeper pose than you. It's just not. That's not how it goes.
And I'll just share a comment for both of you that has come out of the YouTube discussion forum or the live chat. And Virginia states, thank you for doing such a great job with the class videos, the readings, the interviews, and the yoga instruction. I appreciate that you both put yourself out there for us to learn from. Bravo. So there's a bit of positive feedback for you.
Thank you, Virginia.
And that was seconded by numerous folks in the threads as well. So that's a great point to share. Catherine,
can I
sure.
just add something to that from a practitioner standpoint? Once I made my yoga practice my own and was not comparing or competing with anyone. We all do it. For a lot of us, when you start out, you're saying, oh, what should I look like? What is this supposed to look like? It should be, how does this feel to me? How do I feel right now? And once you can bring that attention to yourself rather than comparing to others, it makes a huge difference. And Georgia's pawing at me.
I was just going to say, I think all yoga should be done A, with dogs, or B, with goats. I mean, and I guess cats occasionally, but definitely, Georgia, it's good to have you in the equation. Catherine, while you've got the mic, one of the questions that's come up is about research. And there was a thread in the discussion forum that looks at the specifics of the research around yoga. So one of the questions directed to you for this session was, how long have we been doing research on yoga? And if I can amend that question slightly, how does that compare to, say, research around meditation, mindfulness, or other contemplative sciences? It's a big question.
And that's a general we, as in?
A general we. Start with a general we, and then, but I'd love to hear more from you because I know you're doing some fascinating research around breath and so on. But
so, well, from I can speak from more of like a US centric Western science, as I've said in the videos, point of view. We really saw a big increase in research around meditation, beginning in the late 70s and 80s. And then there's been a huge boom in meditation research in the 90s and starting the year 2000 and on. And now it's just growing every year. So as far as a meditation, mindfulness standpoint, definitely within, the last 40 to 50 years. Yoga, as I've said in the videos, we started getting federal funding for research on yoga in the late 90s. So I think it's growing every year, and there are even entire journals now devoted to scientific research on yoga. So I think in the larger scheme of things, so from my point of view, I think I'm familiar with psychological science, and so that's been around for a century plus. And then the research on specifically on meditation and yoga is, I guess, you could say relatively new, considering. And then personally, I've been studying these topics for about 5 years now.
Can't hear you.
Muted.
Oh, there we go. All right. So somebody said, who is the person asking these questions off camera? So I think it's Ed Sullivan over here in a corner. Anyways, I'm George Siemens, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm with the Link Research Lab, and you'll see me in the forums, but certainly this is Catherine and Stacy's course. So with that, the specifics of the research and the dynamics around the research, I think there's a statement that I've heard you make several times, Stacy, that's quite a delightful one, which is the idea that we're dealing with contemplative practices that have a long history, in some cases millennia behind them, but we're seeing more and more of those things are being supported by new and emerging scientific research from a number of fields. I think that really capturing that, it sort of validated some of those practices. Catherine or Stacy, either of you, who's doing the research in yoga? Are we talking, is it medical doctors? Is it psychologists? Is it neuroscientists? What fields, so to speak, are driving the yoga research?
So it's quite a mixture. There is a field called contemplative science. And that the very nature of that field is it's interdisciplinary. So and yoga research is certainly a part of the broader field of contemplative science. So that would be studying various techniques, not just yoga, but Tai Chi, meditation broadly, different types of meditation, that sort of thing. And that truly is a mixture. You have neuroscience, you have psychologists, you have philosophy, cognitive science. And I will say, in yoga research, there does tend to be more, at least from what I can see, leaning towards medical research, just because there's quite a bit of research around, for instance, chronic pain and that sort of thing. So it's very applicable to certain ailments or certain diseases. So the short answer is that it truly is a mixture of various scientists from across diverse fields. And the best research happens when we can all communicate and draw insight from each other to really make the research quite rich and both scientifically and philosophically informed.
Great. So one of the things I'm going to go into here, Stacey, I'm going to direct this question to you first, and then I'll bring it over to Catherine. And this is something for those of you that are listening that we actually had some discussion on before we hosted this session, because it's potentially difficult to have a conversation, say, about religion and spirituality, because that has come up. In fact, one of the busiest early in the course discussion threads was around this idea about the religious or the spiritual dynamics of it. And I think it's best to tackle these kinds of questions head on, or at least as directly as you can. But if somebody was to come into one of your studios, Stacey, and say, I'm of whatever religion, what are you all selling over here? And what do I need to be aware of? How would you respond to that from a spirituality or religious perspective?
Well, the first thing I would say is that the yoga that we practice has no direct correlation with any religion. I really think of it as just a human practice. I think we have all of these different spokes on a wheel, whether it's religious practice or spiritual practice and teachings. And then there's this essence center that's just, it's so basic and human, and it really dials back to this practice of presence and breath. And so I might say that, we practice a lot of mindful awareness in our classes using breath and body sensation. So some might say that for them that's a spiritual experience, because it helps them get out of the busyness of their mind and land in the concreteness of now. So we pretty much, that's really the truth of it. And it's so simple, but it's also this really powerful thing at the same time. We had a discussion at the studio about this weekend, and I might be wrong about this Latin word, but I think it's spirare, S-P-I-R-A-R-E, and it's the root word for spirit, and it means to breathe. And so, we're so highly basing our yoga practices around breath synchronicity with movement that I feel really good about leaving it at that, because then everyone has their own unique experience. It's not my job to teach someone what their spiritual experience or path should be. But through this practice of nowness and mindful awareness, it's up to them.
I think there's a couple of points that are worth briefly emphasizing on this as well. And one is that spirituality and religion are two different things, and I know that's a general response that comes up in this, that they're not, they're not interchangeable terms, and that was just mentioned in the YouTube forums. The other aspect as well, I think, and you raised this quite effectively, Stacey, which is it's really about practices that are evident in essentially all major religious traditions. Yeah, organized religion, in terms of there is a contemplative component, whether that is prayer, whether that is meditation, whether that is reflection, writing, memorization, and so on. There are ways that religious activities have used those in the past, and I personally see nothing at odds from a religious perspective with the practice of yoga. I think you can treat yoga, if you would like, specifically as a physical activity. Mindfulness specifically as a breathing activity, and there's others who may take it or do different, engage in different activities with it, but essentially there's no pre-existing structure in it that pulls you in. It's something that you create through what you bring to it mentally and emotionally.
It's so very personal. I mean, it really is. It's so personal to us making it whatever we choose to make it.
Yeah. Catherine, what are your thoughts on this?
So I have sort of dealt with this before, not specifically with yoga, but especially with bringing mindfulness practices or meditative practices in secular settings, such as public schools. And I think that there tends to be this, what ends up being argued and what's created is this dichotomy between, pure people thinking it's purely secular and arguing for that, and people arguing that it's a religious practice. But I think it's a lot healthier to view it more as a spectrum. So sort of drawing on my lecture on the river of well-being, of not being firmly in one camp or the other and being able to sort of see both sides. So I think on the one hand, there's this argument that, you're bringing in a practice that has religious roots, and you're giving that and bringing that in secular settings, and giving that to children or others. And then on sort of the other side, there's even the argument that you're sort of stripping the essence of what mindfulness and even yoga or meditative practices, what they were. You're stripping the ethical dimension off of it, and just giving people these practices which could be, harmful or that sort of thing. So my view is really to view it more as like a spectrum. So don't fall into one camp or the other, and realize that, the practice itself is what we know yoga to be today is sort of its own thing. It isn't something that was created 500 years ago or however long, and we practice it the same way. It's sort of like its own unique practice that we can take into our lives, and you like you said, you make it personal. So you bring in and you absorb whatever ethical dimensions that you wish to take from it, and you make it your own, and appreciate yoga as it is today for what it is, that it's sort of drawn from different traditions, and it's not this purely religious or Hindu practice, and meditation isn't purely Buddhist. Like these practices, like you said, George, are taken from many different traditions.
Well, I think from that, and one of the things I'd love of us to spend a little bit of time diving into now is the idea of breath and the specifics of breath practice, because both of you address this as in many ways, it's breathing. It's being aware of the moment and being, in the moment that we currently experience. So one question that came off of YouTube, and Melissa specifically asked this idea that, well, paying attention to my breath is a trigger for anxiety and panic. Studies have shown that 1 to 2% of people have this same problem. So from a mindfulness perspective, what can Melissa do in this type of a situation or with this type of a challenge?
So I would suggest changing your anchor point. We start with breath because it is free and everyone has it, but you certainly don't have to make that your specific focus. You can choose, for example, you could choose a sound to focus your attention on. And so it could be like a repetitive sound, or it could be even sort of a noise that occurs within your environment. And George is making another appearance. You could also focus on a specific body part. So if the breath triggers something, rather than focusing on your chest or your belly, you could choose to focus on a very specific body part, maybe like the tip of your nose, or another area of your body that doesn't trigger those attacks. So I would just say choose a different anchor point, or choose, if you really can't do any of those, something that's in your environment or part of you. You could choose to focus on a specific thought, or like the compassion practice, we meditated on the idea of compassion and focusing on different people. So I would say that there are plenty of other options there.
Great, thanks, Catherine. Stacy, let's turn back again to something that extend what we were just talking about in terms of breath and from a mindfulness end. But there's been quite a few questions around breath and the role of diaphragmatic breathing and so on in the practice of yoga. So one specific question, which is, can you explain a little bit more about diaphragmatic breathing that is posted in Yoga Class Week 1? how can I share this with my classes? So that's the one question. So just keep that one in mind, but I also want to emphasize a follow-up question that addressed a similar concern, which is, Ujjayi breath. Individual says, I've heard it before and know how to do it, but how do you do that? Is it something you're supposed to practice the entire duration of a yoga class, or how do you end up bringing that breath practice into it? Two slightly different questions, but I think they're related. So I'll let you tackle it however you would like.
Okay. So I want to say first that all breathing is diaphragmatic breathing. We tend to have these specific practices that we call diaphragmatic breathing because there's a focus on the awareness of it. But every single breath we take is a diaphragmatic breath. So that's one thing that we want to just remember. And I can't remember which week it's in. Maybe Catherine knows, that maybe week 4, but we do another anatomy of breath lecture. And I describe in detail more about how the diaphragm works and how there's this constant shape changing between the thoracic cavity and the abdominal cavity. And so in that first week exercise that we did with diaphragmatic breath, we actually did it lying on the floor face down. And the value of that is you can really feel, so when the diaphragm is moving, there's an actual shape change in the abdomen. So when we take a breath in and the diaphragm drops, there's sort of a pooch out of the belly. So when you're lying on the floor, you're right there with it. You can feel that contact in the floor. And so in a yoga class, really, you could do this in so many different ways. Sometimes I like to start or end a practice with the students placing their hand on their, like 2 open palms on the belly and feeling the breath before we move into more physical postures. There's just bringing the awareness to the sensation inside the abdomen that's happening, inside the chest that's happening. All of those things are bringing awareness to how the diaphragm works with breath. And then with Ujjayi breath, so Ujjayi breath, also called victorious breath, we did a little lecture on that, I believe, last week with that. So first, let me say, I think someone asked the question, should we do this the whole class? I want to remind you, just like with the postures, there's never any should or have to with anything. There's different ways we practice different things, as George mentioned. And within any style of yoga, that's a flow style. So we have vinyasa or ashtanga, flow, anything that's synchronizing breath and movement. It's typically central to that practice to use Ujjayi breath during the practice. So there are so many different types of pranayamas, which are breath exercises, and many of them are taught to be done just seated or lying. Ujjayi breath is also a pranayama exercise, but it's one that's done in asana. And again, it's mainly used in these flow types of yogas. And so, for instance, in the classes that we teach, we have a little bit of time in the beginning of class where we're not right away jumping into that breath yet, but we sort of build into it as we build into the physicality of the practice. And then it sort of trails as we get to the end of practice and we're getting to the finishing still postures. We might switch into more of just a simple breath awareness, a natural autonomic breath. So I hope that answers how you would use it in a class. And different styles will do different things. But again, the flow styles tend to base the practice around victorious breath. Was that all the questions, George?
Sure. No, that's great. Thanks for that one. I'm going to direct the next question at Catherine then. And so one of the things that Catherine has looked at a fair bit is some of the nature of the research, and particularly I'm looking at the question of compassion, and that was something that Catherine actually opened with, and we're actually down. This went by far quicker than I thought it would, but we're down to about 5-6 minutes left. So the question that was asked in advance in the forums was that yoga and meditation are ways of life in India, but compassion meditation, which was something was introduced, they said was new. It was new to them. Does it really help? Are there studies that show the results of compassion meditation?
Yeah, I would first direct you to the lecture in week 2 on one of the well-being lectures. I think is the brain science of well-being. I discussed a few findings from interventions that have looked at compassion meditation. And a lot of the research that I'm familiar with is come out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison from the Center of Healthy Minds. And that's largely Dr. Richie Davidson's work. But there's certainly a number of other researchers that study compassion meditation. And I will say, just from my point of view, being heavily involved in the area of contemplative science, that really seems to be, there was a big mindfulness hype, and it's certainly still there. There's like this mindfulness revolution that people talk about. But as far as from a research angle, we're moving a lot more into like interpersonal, more compassion-based, even self-compassion-based research. So I think that that's sort of where the research is going. But to get back to my point of the research out of the University of Wisconsin and the Center for Healthy Minds, they've done a number of studies that have looked specifically at both neuroscientific outcomes, so actually how compassion meditation affects the brain, and sort of the circuitry in our brain, so how our brains communicate, specifically brain structures like the amygdala, and that sort of thing that you could certainly do more reading about. And we presented, given articles to you about those practices. But then there's also real behavioral outcomes. So for example, in one study, individuals who were assigned compassion meditation, they came back into the lab. There was a control group and a compassion group, and those in the compassion group actually gave up their seat to a greater extent than those that were in a control group, showing that if you actually are practicing compassion meditation, this shows up in your real world behavior. You're a kinder human being. So that's a good outcome too. So we've certainly shared those resources, and I think we're happy to share other resources too, to look specifically at the positive effects of compassion meditation.
Great, thanks, Catherine. I think I'll ask one final question to Stacy, and then we'll just do some quick wrap-ups because we're at the end of the hour. This is a great question, which is, I want to get certified, but I still can't do a handstand, and I'm working on advanced arm balances. Will that be a problem if I want to teach? So short answer is, do I have to have my act together and be an amazing yogi before I can actually start teaching yoga or doing teacher training?
Oh, well, the question is, what is an amazing yogi, right? And we so often in today's day and age get confused and think that an amazing yogi is this, certain ideal aesthetic and posture, and then we can do all the fancy postures. My personal opinion is that no one ever has to achieve a handstand or arm balances to be whatever an amazing yogi is. So absolutely not. I don't, because we need to train teachers, we have this question all the time. We have people ask us, how do I know if I'm ready to teach yoga? How do I know if I'm ready to go to teacher training? And I always ask the question, do you love the practice? And, yes is typically the answer to that, or they wouldn't be asking me. And then, are you wanting to share it with others? Do you feel like you're wanting to share this practice that had some sort of impact in your life that you're wanting to share with others? And if the answer is yes, well, then I say you're ready to go to train. I don't think that, I think it's important to have a physical base in your body and to understand basic postures and breath and such. But as far as the advanced postures, I just don't think that you have to be able to ever do them.
Great, thanks, Stacy. So we're going to wrap up now. I'm going to give each of you 30 seconds or a minute, whatever you'd like to just sort of, we're up to week 3 in the course. We're going to have several additional live sessions going forward, but try and do 2 things in your wrap-up comments. One, bit of a reflection on here's where we are. We've made a fair bit of progress in the first few weeks. But then secondly, maybe a little bit of what would you like the participants in the course to sort of frameworks or mindsets that you want to encourage them to have or to adopt going forward, because a 6-week online course with 5+ hours a week, it's a tough slog. Like, it's a lot of time, especially for people who've already said, I've got a lot going on in my life. It's hard to do. So why don't we start with you, Catherine? What would you, just reflections on where we're at in the course and mindsets or approaches that you'd encourage participants to adopt as they go forward?
Yeah, so I just say, I know that there have been a few comments about really wanting more science, and we do get a lot more science this week and the weeks going forward. So next week, we really get into the intricacies of the stress system and talk about stress. And then the next week, we talk about, breath and how that impacts the body and so on. So that's coming. I will just say, which I think we've reiterated multiple times, is really just being open and not so rigid and harsh. Just being open to different points of view and being willing to listen to the other side. Don't be so firmly grounded in your own stance that you can't listen to another point of view. As far as staying with the material, I think do the activities that resonate with you. Certainly, if you're doing a certificate, you need to do the required activities, but don't have some compassion towards yourself, and don't let yourself get so stressed out about viewing every single thing or viewing every single comment. Just really being patient and kind to yourself as you go forward. Rambling. Thanks.
No, you weren't rambling at all. I think it's some great points, and especially the research end. That's important to emphasize. It's come up on a few different strands in the forums, and you'll do a deeper dive, and there'll be a lot more of that discussion going forward. And as we said in one of our earlier discussions, it's tough to balance. How do you present? How much content do you want up front? Do you want the holistic experience? Do you want to begin with bits and pieces and build it up? And we made a lot of design choices throughout the course that will work for some people sometimes, and then other times won't work for those people, but it'll work for someone else. Mm-hmm. Stacy,
yeah,
where are we at? What do you advise for participants going forward?
Yeah, I would just say from where we're at now, and I've seen a lot of this already, but just stay curious and open with everything. And if you're like me, the exercises or the parts of the course that you find yourself kind of turning away from, those might be the ones that you need to just consider turning into. I know some people have mentioned not liking to journal, those sorts of things, but just be open and curious what might happen if you try just a little of those things, especially the things that you find yourself kind of veering away from. And with the physical practice, we've said this in many different ways, but you gotta make it your own. So I know some of you are very capable of doing the classes, even the mini classes or the full class, completely and fully. But whatever you can do is what you should do. So if you can only do, portions of the standing postures and you have to skip lots of it, that will be great. So know that, relax with that, know that that's okay. And I guess lastly, really, I know you can't read all of the stuff that's on the forum, there's so much there, but get in there and listen to other people's opinions and see what they're sharing, because that is the very thing. I know for me, just hearing what other people have to say is often the very thing that opens me up to understanding something new about myself. Just enjoy it. Don't stress out about it. Like Catherine said, just do the pieces that you can do.
Great stuff. Thanks both of you for taking the time in our evenings, at least. I know some of you are in different parts of the world, and maybe some people in Hawaii are sitting on the beach while they're listening to this delightful yoga discussion. But I just want to say thanks to all of you for joining. It's been terrific seeing the questions come through on YouTube and being able to respond to some of those for both Catherine and Stacy. Some really positive comments to both of you around a really nicely planned course. Really enjoyed the live session. Questions about hoping that there will be even more live sessions in the future. But and then a lot of comments on thanks for the class, thanks for terrific opportunities to learn and practice in this amazing field. Love to have another live session. Thank you, Stacy and Catherine. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for this. I needed this one. Thanks everyone for the course, enjoying it, and appreciate all the new information and so on. So that just gives you a sampling of the kinds of comments that we're seeing in the YouTube discussion forum. So I hope that gives you just a sense of the hundreds of hours you've put in are worth it. On that note, I do want to particularly say thank you to those of you that did join and provide some questions and gave us the privilege of having your attention over the last hour. And of course, the incredible amount of engagement you've done in the discussion forums, and as much just the way that you're teaching one another by answering questions and by encouraging others when they reflect on, I'm having a difficult time thinking I can do this, and everybody jumps into action and provides encouragement and support. I think that's been just delightful to see, this global compassion and global caring that comes through in the forums. We will be doing at least 2 more live sessions for the balance of the course. We'll provide you an update on those shortly. But I just want to say thanks all for joining. Hope you have a good night, good afternoon, good morning. Take care all.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
I'm George.